Through the eyes of the newsreel camera, we bring you an affectionate look at the way we used to live in the 1960s. Those were the days. A key event in the shaping of the 1960s occurred at the very beginning of the decade. National service, the system that had obliged Britain's young men to complete 2 years of military service, had finally been scrapped. This gave thousands of 18-year-olds the chance to enjoy life, just as they were coming of age. The decade began joyously for Britain with a royal wedding. On May 6, 1960, Princess Margaret married Anthony Armstrong Jones, a society photographer, at Westminster Abbey, and the newsreel cameras captured the event. The marriage charmed the whole nation. It was a perfect way to start a new decade.
The couple received the blessing of the Archbishop. And now, London and the world awaits their first appearance as man and wife. And so to the Britannia and the gay chorus of the sea. Such was a May wedding in London, which touched the hearts of people far and wide, not only for its solemn vows and circumstance, not only for the pomp of beauty and romance, but for the happiness that sailed on the evening tide.
It was not only Britain which celebrated the remarkable achievement of Russian cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin. In 1961, he made the first manned space flight and gave the Russians an early lead in the space race. Gagarin was given a hero's welcome when he returned to Earth.
All Russia's just wild about Yuri Gagarin, first man to conquer space. In his 4.5-ton nose cone, he orbited once and was back again 108 minutes after takeoff. Major Gagarin was landing in Moscow, and Mr. K was with Yuri's wife and parents to greet him. What a hero was this young cosmonaut. Unknown one day, the next, the most publicized man in the world. A bear hug from Khrushchev expressed the feelings of all the nation. In a triumphal cavalcade, Gagarin was driven into Moscow, sitting between his wife and Khrushchev. What the whole of Russia felt, the people of Moscow put into their cheers for hero number one of the Soviet Union, Yuri Gagarin.
Look again. Look again. You can be the girl with look again hair. It's just a matter of using a Marmy Wave Setting Conditioner. It sets, it shines, it makes you lovelier. With a Marmy, you can set your hair into soft, glamorous curls and waves. And the conditioner in a Marmy makes your hair shine like satin. Be sure of admiration wherever you go. Be the girl with look again hair. Use wonderful Marmy Wave Setting Conditioner.
Overseas in the 1960s, Britain continued to transform what had been her empire into the Commonwealth. In 1961, Sierra Leone celebrated its newfound independence. The breakup of Britain's empire brought with it a powerful wind of change.
In the colony and protectorate of Sierra Leone, there has been none of the strife which elsewhere has sometimes preceded the granting of independence. But there was no resentment of their past colonialism. Long affection between the British and the Creoles ensured a smooth changeover. The Queen, in sending her cousin to represent her on this day, underlined the close ties between the royal house and the colony and protectorate. The representatives were already assembled to hear the Duke read the speech from the throne. In that message, Her Majesty welcomed Sierra Leone into the Commonwealth family of nations. Then, as her representative, the Duke conveyed the royal instruments of Sierra Leone independence to the Prime Minister, Sir Milton Margai. All over the country, it was the signal for rejoicing, much of it expressed in dancing.
In 1961, communist East Germany began to build a wall to separate its citizens from the temptations of the West. The Berlin Wall became a symbol of the Cold War and a vivid reminder of a simmering threat to peace that existed in the very heart of Europe.
This year alone, 144,000 have fled to the West. Since the war, 3 million. East Berlin and Moscow were at first annoyed, then alarmed. Somehow the flow of refugees had to be stopped. Now the barricades are going up everywhere. Tanks are along the boundary. The guards have been redoubled. This is East Germany's complete admission that the people can be kept on their side of the border only by force. How sad the plight of those East Germans who read that the boundaries had been sealed and that they had left their escape attempt too late.
Shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union.
The communist menace became a terrifying reality in 1962 when the world went to the very brink of nuclear war. The Russians placed nuclear weapons in Cuba, close to mainland America.
The tenseness was unmistakable. Both people and government expected an American invasion. Students helped to man the anti-aircraft guns. Not very impressive-looking weapons against the sort of planes the US could have sent over if invasion had been the plan. At last, the Cubans, army and people, knew that Russian rocket sites had been installed and that more were on the way before President Kennedy imposed the blockade. Needless to say, it was still easy to fan anti-American feeling, playing on the supposed threat of invasion.
Cool heads in a volatile situation eventually saw sense, and a nuclear showdown was narrowly avoided.
After Kennedy called the Russian bluff, even the Cubans sensed that Castro suspected he had backed the wrong horse. The rockets will be dismantled and taken away.
Headaches dissolve safely with Disprin.
Throughout Britain, the financial boom of the early 60s put fresh money in everyone's pockets. After years of austerity, there was suddenly an extraordinary sense of freedom in the air. For the first time since the war, young people had money to spend and a huge choice of things to spend it on. How you looked mattered more than ever. It was seen as a form of self-expression. In true British style, the disposable paper dress, halfway between a poster and a fashion item, was all the rage.
There's no doubt that something is happening in the world of men's fashions. Neither white jeans nor a suede shirt is the staid man's cup of tea, but then the staid man is apparently on the way out as far as clothes are concerned. The heritage shirt with rust slacks shows the trend today. And for the country, try something in this style. In the sun, what better than Bermuda shorts and jacket? Get the general idea? Don't be afraid of something new. Then the opposite sex will be really interested. Carnaby Street's never imagined years ago it would be a fashion centre, and it's worlds away from the Dorchester. It's the street where all the withered boys go for the expensive outfits the chicks dig. No use having a good leg if the trousers aren't cut to show it. No matter how handsome a mod may be, the right gear gives him real class. No wonder Carnaby Street's doing big business. They daren't fall behind in the fashion race. When Mary Quant invades new realms of fashion, bright young girls are interested, and so is the national press. As the outcome of 2 years' hard work, Mary has perfected the very thing the new generation had been hoping for. Boots and shoes that are distinctive, comfortable, washable, and nearly indestructible. Mary believes that footwear should fit like a glove. Wear the latest kind when you're young, and in later life, you'll never complain that your feet are killing you. That sounds like a wonderful future, viewed from any angle.
When the New York gal weds a big tycoon, they go to Miami for the honeymoon. And what do they drink while they sit and spoon? America's favorite coffee.
Maxwell House instant coffee lover, made in a moment, right in the cup.
America's favorite coffee.
Maxwell House instant coffee. It's made in England now.
There's no cure for baldness, but a Manchester firm have developed the next best remedy, a new look toupee. Short back and sides are out at this hairdresser's in reverse. It's more important to get that crown or temple measurement correct. A neat hairstyle always makes a good impression. It's embarrassing enough when a hat blows off, but there's a worse fate for the wearer of a toupee unless it feels secure. Still not convinced about this new look for bald men? Take the advice of an expert. He should know.
Freedom of expression wasn't limited to clothes, as this young couple demonstrate.
The place these two characters went to caters for exactly that, dressing the crops like crazy. Sort of place that gives new heads for Teds. Girls like boys, boys like girls. Both the squares think like nothing on earth. Okay, man, shoot with that crazy wind machine. Cyril certainly is the most in this business. What a stylist. A touch of the silver spray, and you're king of the coffee bar. All this talk about sex equality has clean gone to their heads.
Hollywood continued to cast its spell in Britain as everywhere else. In 1962, the media reflected the nation's shock at the unexpected death of an American superstar, Marilyn Monroe.
When she married the eminent dramatist Arthur Miller, they said that at last she had attained the personal happiness which had eluded her till then. Miller, people thought, would give her the stability her life had lacked till then. And so for a short time, it seemed to be. Yet, all the time, she was basically unhappy. And now, to her unnumbered admirers, the great and humble alike, there is only the lovely memory of Marilyn Monroe.
In the early 60s, the British press and public were still fascinated by the royal children. Princess Anne's first day at Benedon School was a major news story.
The headmistress, Miss Elizabeth Clark, and her staff were taking the big day in their stride. She was receiving more than 60 new girls, and they, of course, will remember the occasion all their lives. To the Queen were presented the head girl of the school and of Princess Anne's house. Her Majesty greeted members of the staff, and the atmosphere was unaffectedly friendly. So Princess Anne has begun life at school. May the years she will spend there be always pleasantly remembered.
A year earlier, Prince Charles had travelled to Scotland with his father, Prince Philip, for the first day of term at his new school, Gordonston.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
There was disbelief when news reached Britain that John F. Kennedy, the President of the United States, had been assassinated in Dallas, Texas. He'd been a great ally to Britain and had offered the world the hope of a bright future. There was a vast wave of sympathy for America and for the President's beautiful widow.
From a high window rings out the shot that changes American history. Confusion is indescribable. Both the President and Governor Connolly are hit. While they are rushed to hospital, swarms of police and FBI men search for the assassin. The police now have the murder gun. On it, they say, a palm print of the man under arrest. He is 24-year-old Lee Harvey Oswald. 4 years ago, he defected to Russia, worked there, and married a Russian. Now the world hears the appalling news. President Kennedy is dead. In a bronze coffin, his body arrives at the airport. Mrs. Kennedy, her dress stained with her husband's blood, rides in the ambulance. It is dark at the White House when the body of Mr. Kennedy is brought back. The saddest homecoming in presidential history.
So Disprin dissolves your pain away safely and quickly.
In 60s Britain, how and where we lived changed dramatically. New towns continued to replace the slums. They raised the standard of living for families all over the country.
Basildon Newtown, where the architects could draw on tradition, but without any need for compromise, translate a drawing board dream into living reality. Basildon, with its integrated shopping centres and bright new houses, built so that no traffic roads separate them from schools, splendid in their spaciousness. And spaciousness is part of this concept of modern living, which has given hope and happiness to people sick of overcrowding in the big cities.
This is the standard house that today's teenagers may live in when they marry. Touch of the switch central heating, they say, will soon be universal. because we're seeing the prototype of luxury living ready for mass production, with banquet candles as adjustable as a gas stove. Look at tomorrow's standard electric lights. There'll be no more children scalding themselves in the kitchen when safety stoves like this are the rule of the day. But how can you nag a husband when you've got a machine that will do all the washing up? Now see how you'll do the ironing tomorrow. Look, no hands. Imagine it. This really is magic.
It wasn't just in the kitchen that things were changing.
Versatility is the keynote of these comfy, flexible foam shapes known as Beauvale Jumbos. Each unit is easily convertible into a variety of take-it-easy lounges. Meditate on the new style yoga bed. Cost complete, £37. Very versatile. Time for reflection while taking it easy is the latest idea on the furniture scene. It's made from PVC and uses air for interior springing. The manufacturers say it looks good in any setting. Of course, one has to take care with pins. While not everyone cares for the transparent look, it has its advantages. The settee costs only £20. Even the most delicate female can throw it around.
Somebody says, you'll be better off with an M&B. And out it comes. These boys bowl better on M&B bitter. Good and strong, sparkling bright and clear. And me, I'm for an M&B export. The best pale ale of all. You'd be better off with an M&B. It's marvellous beer.
Never in the field of human conflict when so much owed by so many to so few.
Long over Westminster will linger the spirit of Winston Churchill. By the Queen's wish, the nation's wish, he now lay in state in Westminster Hall. How right indeed that he should rest in this historic place.
Britain honoured the life of one of its greatest leaders when Sir Winston Churchill died on January 24, 1965. The most remarkable British statesman of the century, he was granted the kind of state funeral usually reserved for royalty.
In London, the flags everywhere at half-mast. Sorrow was felt now. The old warrior had fought his last fight. It was time now for the tribute of the people. Some had waited all night to be among the first to enter Westminster Hall. First of a huge throng to come during the lying in state. People of all ages, of all classes, filed reverently past. For never has so eminent a man been so widely loved. The Pennine Moorlands, scene of one of the most intensive murder hunts of the century. Police and hundreds of volunteers continue their gruesome search for the bodies of murder victims, working on a scant tip-off that the bleak moors hide the evidence of a mass murderer.
The discovery of the bodies of 2 children on the Yorkshire moors in 1966 led to a massive police investigation.
Police and tracker dogs have stepped up the search since the body of 10-year-old Anne Downey was found here. She had been missing since last Boxing Day. Nearby, the hunt also revealed the grave of 12-year-old John Kilbride. More clues were discovered. Tests may prove them to be of vital importance.
In May, Ian Brady and Myra Hindley were sentenced to life imprisonment for the horrific Moors murders.
While the moorland search continues, police have been probing the mysteries of bloodstains in an unoccupied house near Manchester. An old van discovered in Nottinghamshire may also prove to be a vital clue in the murder hunt.
Holidays were precious times in 1960s Britain. Most people still went to the beach to enjoy traditional entertainment such as Punch and Judy or the amusement arcades on the pier. But the traditional bucket and spade resorts were beginning to witness violence.
If Brighton did not do record holiday business, it must have been very close to it. That unfailing recipe, sun, sea and the beach, was mixed to perfection. Brighton did not go scot-free. Before the holiday was over, The 76 mods and rockers were arrested. For the rest, it was pretty well perfect.
Seaside holiday camps were also popular.
This is a new game they're trying out at the Clacton Holiday Camp. Not exactly a game of skill, though you do play it on a marked board or sheet. But there are no pieces to play with. You have to use yourself. The arrow tells you where to put your hands and feet, and the idea is to overbalance your opponent. It sounds as complicated as the things that happen when you play it. They call it the twister, and the makers say it's guaranteed to tie you up in knots.
Foreign holidays were becoming cheaper and more popular, aided by the rapid growth of air travel. British airlines such as BOAC began to offer cheaper services aimed directly at holidaymakers. For many Britons, flying was an exciting new experience. For a lucky few, a trip to Florida, to Disney's theme park, became an option.
Main Street is the hub of this happy kingdom, and Pluto is there to remind you who it was that dreamed up all this color and fun. Not to mention Goofy.
Walt Disney's lovable cartoon characters soon became favorites for a new generation of kids. In the 1960s, corporate America successfully crossed the Atlantic.
Pray then, ladies, discover for yourselves, at modest cost, the excellence of Mr. Twining's tea.
For British sports fans, the unforgettable moment of the decade was England's World Cup victory in 1966. There was controversy before a ball was kicked. The golden trophy was stolen while being exhibited around the country. It was later discovered by a dog called Pickles, who briefly became a national hero. With victory almost in England's grasp, Germany forced an equaliser, and the game went into extra time. What followed became one of sport's most controversial moments.
Goal claimed England. No goal, protested the Germans. The referee consulted the linesman, who'd been in line with the posts, and goal it was.
A few minutes later, the game was over beyond any doubt.
Geoff Hurst saw an opening in the defence and achieved the hat-trick. Bobby Moore led England up to the Royal Box to receive the Jules Rimet Cup and the winners' medals. To be here as winners of the FA Cup has often been described as the summit of a footballer's ambition. How much greater was the triumph they enjoyed now. Three years ago, Alf Ramsey set out on the hard road that led to the World Cup. Only the optimists thought he could possibly succeed.
From celebration to disaster in October 1966, when news of the Aberfan landslide broke, a massive coal slag heap buried a school in the Welsh mining town.
In a few minutes, nearly 200 children, happy because they would begin a holiday that afternoon, were engulfed. On the site of the landslide, the task of rescue operated with speed. It looked impossible, it looked hopeless. But these men are miners. Their children were buried in that mud. Mud almost filled the classrooms. With shovels, if necessary, with bare hands, they pitted themselves against the uncounted tons of slimy filth, the waste product of coal mining. Perhaps their little sons and daughters might still be alive. The school lay in the direct path of the disintegrating man-made mountain.
In the 60s, 4 young musicians from Liverpool changed pop music forever, and their screaming fans created a new phenomenon, Beatlemania.
They're natural, these fabulous 4, bubbling over with fun, getting as much kick out of entertaining as the fans get from them. George Harrison, Ringo Starr, John Lennon, Paul McCartney.
The Beatles were the first British band to achieve massive success simultaneously on both sides of the Atlantic. They launched the British invasion of the American charts. John, Paul, George and Ringo added to the feeling that Britain was the place to be in the 60s.
The crowds that waited outside could cheer them all the way to the hotel. No arguing about it. The Beatles are the top pop music phenomenon of the century.
There was not much rock music on BBC-controlled radio, but kids wanted to hear it, and the demand was met by so-called pirate radio stations. For most of the 1960s, they were a prickly thorn in the side of Britain's mainstream broadcasters. The first of these pirates was Radio Caroline, anchored 3 miles off the North Sea coast.
Caroline Radio is on the air 12 hours a day, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Between those hours, they think there's a public large enough to attract local advertising revenue. The radio company believe it's all perfectly legal. In the ship's studio, they broadcast with no more concern than if it were all in Broadcasting House.
Brace yourself for it and prepare to meet, in some sort of action, a hippie. This is history, all right. This is what they call a love-in.
The mid-60s saw the emergence of the hippies in Britain. They dressed in way-out clothes and were into flower power, free love, drugs and groovy music. They believed in free expression and were viewed with dismay, amusement or fear by the British public.
They are not all rebels. Some are part-timers, simply trying to meet up with those who have really contracted out of normality.
Their rebellion was one of peace and love, but then they began to get involved in protest politics. Their influence, their music and their fashion had a major impact on 60s culture. If the Beatles were the acceptable face of Britain's pop boom, the Rolling Stones were its dark, dangerous side. They represented a voice of contempt for conventional society, and their fans were drifting well away from the philosophy of love and peace. After the death of Brian Jones in 1969, the Rolling Stones gave a famous free concert to more than 250,000 of their fans in Hyde Park, London.
Some 3,500 white butterflies were released. Mick Jagger had read a poem which included the line, "He is not dead," in tribute to the young guitarist who had died shortly before in the swimming pool at his home. In the oldest traditions of show business, the show went on. Not everybody understands the youngsters who like this kind of music, but then it wouldn't do if everyone had the same tastes, would it?
All right, it's all right with me.
However, Elvis Presley was still the world's most popular music star, even after he married long-term girlfriend Priscilla.
Heartthrob pop singer Elvis Presley is a real-life bridegroom at last. 8 years ago, when he was a soldier in Germany, he met Priscilla Beaulieu, daughter of a U.S. lieutenant colonel who was also serving out there. As she was then only 14, they had to wait a bit. Now, who could say who was the luckier, the pelvis or pretty Priscilla?
At the Royal Garden Hotel in London, top chefs are competing to find the most mouth-watering way of serving the avocado, which used to be eaten plain with a little oil and vinegar. For the Golden Avocado Pear Award, you've got to contrive something subtler than that. But people here have been slow to learn how many ways there are of dishing it up. They're learning now, all right.
With ration books, a fading memory, all sorts of food became available in the 60s. British people were keen to experiment.
Two young people walking out walked into a cinema restaurant in Chester and learned how 1965 science is applied to cooking. No more waiting. Each order served before you can say no. Whether it's steak and chips, curry, fish and chips, or anything else on the menu. And it's done to a turn in a matter of seconds, which is the big point of using microwave energy.
Hamburgers perfectly done in 15 seconds. It's wonderful news for women. Don't be put off by the words microwaves any more than you are by watts and amperes when you use an electric kettle. In the home kitchen, it could be the end of slaving over the hot stove.
The GPO Tower. It houses the post office's last word in communication. But up here, you're literally above all that, revolving in Butlin's top-of-the-tower restaurant, offering you a visual menu that takes your breath, but not your appetite, away. This is a really exciting kind of Epicurean thrill. This is the only way you can eat your way around London without overdoing it. The soup with St. Paul's, the fish over Fitzrovia, and you can see the South Downs with your steak. The food up here is no optical illusion. It's high life par excellence. You've really come up in the world here, where you're always moving with the times, and the whole of London is yours, on a plate.
Since 1965, American troops have been fighting the communist Viet Cong guerrillas in North Vietnam. By 1968, the war had claimed thousands of American lives. Young people in America and Europe doubted that the war could ever be won and were strongly opposed to continuing American involvement in Southeast Asia.
Both sides in this long and escalating war believe that it can be won on the battlefield, though many experts in neutral countries say that in a negotiated settlement lies the best hope of a lasting peace. In the wake of mortar fire and bombs, landing parties moved towards the jungle hideouts of the Viet Cong, and this was only one of many attacks carried out almost daily within 25 miles of Saigon.
As the death toll continued to rise, the anti-war protests in Britain became angrier.
It started as an anti-Vietnam War demonstration in Trafalgar Square. Vanessa Redgrave, as usual, was in the vanguard of the would-be peacemakers. But also there were troublemakers, people not content to just voice their disapproval of the war in Vietnam. And so they marched through the Sunday streets of London to Grosvenor Square and the American Embassy.
By the late 60s, the peaceful protests of the hippie movement had all but disappeared. A more radical agenda had evolved.
But at the head and in the midst of the advancing column, the hate makers were at work. This was how they turned a demonstration for peace into a bloody riot such as Britain has never before witnessed.
Protest was by this time less about alternative lifestyles and more about political goals. Protesters were united against what they saw as the repressive machinery of the state. The air of optimism that had carried Britain through most of the decade was beginning to fade, and the protest had become stained with violence. News reports of the time were not always sympathetic to the protesters.
117 policemen were injured while defending themselves and doing their duty. Only 45 demonstrators were hurt. The police have earned the highest possible praise for their incredible self-control against overwhelming brute force on a day when a demonstration for peace ended as a war in the heart of London.
Across the Channel, French students and workers joined forces to protest against the Vietnam War and began a long and bloody fight with the police. Their battles were more violent than anything seen in Britain.
The students were using Molotov cocktails, petrol-filled bottles, which they showered on the police. Police retaliated with tear gas grenades. War raged in the streets of Paris.
Meanwhile, Britain continued to display its flair for commercial innovation.
Everything here is designed to speed commerce along. Machines can do anything. For instance, counting your loose change. Yes, Olympia's the showplace of all that's new and slick in the business world. And when efficiency brings in the cash, how about this gadget for saving time counting those good old-fashioned banknotes? Rewarding work, isn't it? And here's the latest in telephones. No dialing needed, just press the right buttons and, hey presto, wrong number. But if you want it in writing, this machine does the trick. Jot it down here, and an exact copy comes out the other end instantly. for the harassed filing clerk a new life. An index finger on the button and up pops the index. A machine that certainly speeds up production. Just the sort of thing Postmaster General Wedgwood Ben's working on. A London exhibition shows how the GPO is mechanizing the mails. It's all done by electronics, virtually eliminating error in the sorting office. Every day, 30 million letters are posted to about 18 million addresses. Hand sorting puts up our postal costs more each year. They haven't developed a robot postman yet, but mechanization is certainly on the way in all other departments. They'll get those bills coming in faster yet.
The assassination of Martin Luther King in 1968 shattered the dream of racial equality. The man whose whole strategy was based on peaceful protest had been violently murdered.
Dr. King was shot down by an assassin in Memphis, butchered by someone who did not understand the meaning of peace, as did the great Negro leader. In Washington, at one of the greatest of all rallies for equality and freedom, Dr. King made an impassioned plea on behalf of the thousands of Negroes and white sympathizers gathered at the Lincoln Memorial.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream.
Dr. Martin Luther King was not allowed to see his dream become reality.
In 1968, communism reminded the world that its leaders were prepared to be ruthless to protect their interests. In Britain, protesters showed their support for the Czech people, who were fighting for their freedom from rule by the Soviet Union.
Large angry crowds found a target for their bitterness at Earl's Court, the Russian exhibition. Police stopped them getting in, but they stayed to demonstrate, echoing the feelings of millions. The citizens of Prague knew the full meaning of occupation by force. The Russians, while supposedly their allies, were not wanted. The fighting spirit of many Czechs was aroused. They retaliated against overwhelming power.
In Czechoslovakia, the Russians soon put an end to attempts to create a more liberal state, and within days a massive Soviet invasion force was sent to crush the demonstrations.
In the midst of their troubles was the added concern for their leaders, Dubček, Svoboda, and others who had disappeared. However, it was learned they were in Moscow, having talks with the Kremlin bosses. They talked, and the world wondered. Dubček and Svoboda are now home from their talks with some form of solution to their country's future. A country, like many others, in quest of peace.
Racing fans, in June 1968, were treated to one of the most exciting derbies in years. The race was won by a remarkable combination of jockey and mount.
Lester Piggott and Sir Ivor, the greatest team ever to race in a derby. Loading the highly strung field into the starting stalls went off without a hitch. In the lead and setting a good early pace was Ben Roy as they raced up the hill. Now the pace was hotting up. Ben Roy still had the lead, but overhauling fast was Connaught, clear of Society, Atopolis, Laureate, Rimond and Sir Ivor. As they entered the final furlong, Sir Ivor. Watch Lester Piggott urge him into a fantastic burst of speed, which shot him to the front. Sir Ivor streaked ahead to pass the post a length and a half clear of Connaught. If ever a horse and jockey deserved to be in the winner's enclosure, they were certainly Sir Ivor and Lester Piggott.
In the 1960s, more cars meant more parking restrictions and the birth of traffic wardens.
This fine body of 50-year-olds, that's the average age, are the first of the new traffic wardens in training to keep the traffic flowing. Mostly former servicemen, they soon finished their basic training. How can we prevent the ever-increasing traffic halting into one big jam? Parking meters in the city of Westminster have done something, but there are still scores of streets and squares being turned into unofficial car parks. But what can you do? You've got to park somewhere. All right, but not in the wrong places, says Scotland Yard. So from now on, the traffic wardens will see that parking meter rules are observed, as well as informing motorists where they can park and coming down on those who do so in forbidden spots. And it's all going to be done courteously. No slanging matches, just say what awful weather we're having, sir, and fine him £2.
This is Wing Commander Kenneth Wallace testing his one-man autogyro in a field outside his home in Norfolk. The rotor blades, which make it look like a helicopter, don't turn until takeoff. The real drive comes from a 72 horsepower propeller engine mounted in the rear. The result is what you might call an aerial scooter, the answer to many of frustrated commuters' heartfelt prayers.
Everyone was on the move in the 60s, and it didn't matter how you got around as long as you were going somewhere.
This cross between an aqualung and a motorbike is the latest idea for lunar travel. But before they go careering about the craters of the moon, they're making sure it's not earthbound. All you need is a few hundred gallons of liquid hydrogen, nerves just as cool, and you really can go up in the world. Straight up.
Sutton Coldfield, another contender in the commuter car race. This one is the Colliday Chariot, brainchild of Mr. Robert Collier. He believes his car, which can turn in a 7-foot circle, has a great future with town shoppers. It's an all-weather vehicle which boasts a detachable hardtop for permitting weather, and though basically a two-seater, provision has been made to find room for a couple of kids. Now for a practical demonstration. 2 adults and 2 children fit in snugly for a trip to the shops. Madam has no gear problems. It's fully automatic. Controls are simply a steering wheel and 2 pedals. One marked stop, the other go. It's claimed that a complete novice could drive it after a minute's instruction. A lightweight plastic body is proof against rust. And another point in its favor is the ease with which it can be parked, even in the smallest space. The Chariot is now ready to go into production and is planned to sell at £300, including purchase tax. Can't be bad.
Any just-can't-wait self-respecting businessman should keep a pogo stick in the boot of his car. When a traffic jam looms ahead, he can still get to the office on time.
Spring in the air, but the only ones to enjoy any of the warmth were students from Cambridge University who took part in a ragweed stunt, among them Frances Hogg, daughter of Quentin. The plan was to have bounced into town from the seat of learning. The weather put paid to that. So, after 24 hours of non-stop bounding around Cambridge, the winning team went to London by more conventional means and just hopped the last few miles to collect their prize.
A motorized bath was the brainchild of these engineering students of Kingston Surrey Technical College when faced with the problem of finding a money-making stunt for Charities Week. Once they'd hit on the idea, they got the bath itself from a student who announced rather vaguely that he no longer needed one. It turned out to be a British-built 1927 model. So that its external shape would not be too much impaired, a compactly designed motor scooter unit was installed at the plug hole end. Everything else, including brake systems, suspension, steering, and gear change mechanisms, were designed and made to comply with the numerous road transport acts. An amateur designer with novel ideas is jobbing contractor Tom Hancock's of High Wycombe, Buckinghamshire. He invented these motorized roller skates during the last war as suggested transport for foot-weary soldiers. He settled for using them simply to give his daughter a lift to work.
British industry was booming in 1968. The launch of a new ocean liner in Glasgow demonstrated that Britain could still claim to be the world's leading shipbuilder.
Dominating the scene, the Q4, culmination of an immense team effort by designers and builders. The bow overhung the slipway to accommodate her great length, 963 feet. The Queen was escorted by Lord Aberconway, chairman of John Brown and Company, and managing director John Raleigh. Many thought that the presence of the Queen's sister indicated that Princess Margaret would be the new ship's name. The slip of paper bore the name that in a few seconds Her Majesty would give to the Q4. The well-kept secret would be world news.
I name this ship
Queen Elizabeth II. May God bless her. May God bless her and all who sail in her.
Old hands at Clydebank remember the day 33 years ago when from the same slipway the Queen Mary was launched. The Queen Elizabeth came 4 years later. And now the Queen Elizabeth II went down to meet the sea.
The Mini had been a great success ever since its launch in 1959. Already a design classic, it was a symbol of the strength of manufacturing industry in Britain.
Longbridge, a big day for the little one. This is the 2 millionth Mini in company with some of those who helped make the pint-sized people car into an international achievement. So the shiny new addition to the family of Minis, complete with a tough guy slogan, joined the lucrative stream of compact autos which begin their career at the factory near Birmingham. It's a career with an assured success, for the Mini is one of the biggest success stories the motor trade has ever known. Certainly the high spot of British motoring history. It's been said they plan to go on making Minis for another 10 years. There'll always be customers for the car with the reputation of a giant and the dimensions of a dwarf that's big enough for the whole world.
By the late 60s, Britain was leading the development of a new energy revolution.
It's in remote places like these throughout Britain that a new type of building is growing up, bringing with it a glimpse of the future. Nuclear power stations will soon be in operation. The electricity generated by them will pour into the grid system to be used by consumers in factories and homes throughout the land. Most of the nuclear power stations are situated on remote, undeveloped coastal sites, in this case Bradwell in Essex. The reason is that an enormous, unlimited supply of cooling water is essential. The design of the power station clearly shows the trend of the future. Fine, open buildings which will provide a major source of the country's electricity in the coming years.
In the air, Britain had forged an alliance with France to build Concorde, the supersonic airliner that became an icon. The design of the plane was revolutionary, and Concorde epitomized the mood of optimism that greeted the end of the decade.
The red, white and blue of Britain's supersonic jet giant was a proud sight as she made her 22-minute maiden flight to RAF Fairford, where the 10,000-foot runway, one of the longest in the country, waited invitingly for the Anglo-French superjet to return to Earth. Gracefully, like a prehistoric winged monster, 002 felt for the ground. This was yet another day of success for the ambitious Anglo-French civil aviation project. The dream of years was a magnificent reality, putting both nations way ahead of the rest of the world and giving glimpses of the speedy 70s which lay ahead.
Prince Charles, the 20-year-old heir to the British throne, found himself the centre of the nation's attention at his investiture as Prince of Wales in Carnarvon Castle in July 1969.
A modern prince in a medieval castle kneeling before the Queen, who was fulfilling a promise and giving Wales a worthy prince for its own. In giving to the prince these insignias of office, the Queen could not conceal the gentle touch of a mother, despite the formal text of the letters patent, which proclaimed that Charles, Philip, Arthur, George may have the name, style, title, state, dignity and honour of the Principality of Wales and Earldom of Chester.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
No story better demonstrates the progress made in the course of the 1960s than this space adventure. At 3:56 a.m. British summertime, Neil Armstrong stepped onto the surface of the moon and finished what Yuri Gagarin had started. The decade ended with the same sense of excitement with which it had begun.
Okay, engine stop. Post control, both autos, engine command override off. Engine arm off. We copy you down, Eagle. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. I'm at the foot of the ladder. I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one